Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday again for session 3 of advocacy training. We are working our way through as we are waiting for some folks to filter in. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We love to have your name, your age, and of course, as you guys may already be aware, if you've attended our earlier sessions, this advocacy training is specifically for youth associated with a zoo, aquarium, or museum. So if you are associated with one of those kinds of facilities, let us know which one that is. We have Savannah from the National Aquarium in Baltimore. We have the Brookfield Zoo, Cincinnati Zoo, Oregon Zoo, from all over. Roundhouse Aquarium, another Brookfield Zoo, Jenkinson's Aquarium, another one from Jenkinson's, Cosley Zoo, Columbus Zoo, Tulsa Zoo, Cleveland Zoo, Akron Zoo. We've got someone from Somaliland. That's awesome. Blank Park Zoo, Fort Wayne Zoo, Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. Amazing. I love doing these sessions because we always have so many different people from so many different parts of the country and the world at really, really different facilities as well. So it's just really cool to have all of you guys here joining us again for the third session. We're going to get started in 1 minute. I'm just going to give it another second for a couple more people to join us. But again, I hope you guys are getting excited for this session. I love talking about social media and communications. This is always a really engaging session when we run advocacy training, especially for young people, I think, because, Gen Z grew up with social media and we grew up with the internet and access to technology. And so doing social media for a lot of people almost feels like second nature, but I think that some of the strategies and stuff that we're going to talk about today are maybe a little counterintuitive in some ways. And I'm really just excited to dig into more of the nitty-gritty stuff. So all of that being said, again, welcome. We have a little rundown of our schedule as per usual, our little panel introduction. We'll do our discussion and then have some time for Q&A before we get to announcements at the end. So we have a lovely guest speaker today, Kelsey Wallace from the Oregon Zoo. She runs their social media program and has been doing communications and social media in a bunch of different ways for a really long time, and is just a really cool person that I'm really excited to talk to today. So Kelsey, I will pass it over to you if you want to just do a quick little introduction of yourself and let everybody know your area of expertise, and then we can get started with the panel.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelsey Wallace. I use she, her pronouns. I am a communication specialist at the Oregon Zoo. I run our social media program, and I also do a lot of media relations at the zoo. So more what we call earned media, like television stations and, news, print news and TV news, coordinating that stuff. And I do a lot of our communications on our website, a lot of editing, basically any kind of external communications that come out of the zoo to people. I have a hand in that, and I edit our videos. So if you have ever seen any videos from the Oregon Zoo, I make those, and I get to film some of them too, although we have an awesome videographer that I work with. So we team up to get content. And yeah, I've been at the zoo since 2018. Before I was at the zoo, I saw there's at least one other Portlander in the chat. I used to work for OPB, which is our public television station here, TV and radio. And I did video production there. I worked at a magazine before that. So I've had a little bit of a roundabout way to getting here, but I have always loved animals, conservation work, and have really wanted to do this type of communications work. So I felt really lucky when the opportunity popped up at the zoo. And I'm from Portland, so the Oregon Zoo is where I grew up going to. So that's an added bonus. And I'm excited to chat. My plan, honestly, I had more of a plan, but then again, for the people who are in Portland know, we had a major ice storm at the zoo. We were locked out of our computers. We weren't able to really do that much for a while. So I thought we can just keep it very casual. Feel free to pop comments in the chat. I see that somebody has beavers as a school animal. I also went to a high school where our mascot was a beaver. So, and I love beavers. So anyway, yeah, I think we have some pre-prepared questions, but I want you to feel free to pop in and ask more too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kelsey. To reiterate again, as for the last two sessions as well, at any point, if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, use the Q&A feature, and we'll keep it moving along during the panel. But if there's a question that comes up that we can answer during the discussion, we'll totally do that. But we definitely have time for Q&A at the end. So moving into our first question, let me collapse some of these Zoom windows so I can actually see what is on the screen here. So getting started, I think that this first question is a pretty, it's not a difficult question to answer, but I think that it isn't necessarily something that we think about in like really structured terms all the time, because like I was saying before, young people who grew up using social media, it's kind of an inherent experience to living in 2024. So I think being really mindful about our use of social media and different kinds of communications is something that should probably be talked about more. So the first question, why is it important to discuss or include promotion and publicity in your ocean conservation events? And what are some ways that digital media can impact conservation action, particularly on days like World Ocean Day? Again, a little bit of kind of not obvious question, but I think, Kelsey, if you have any insight on the specifics of what makes promotion such an important component of an effective advocacy campaign, I think that would be a great place to start.
Sure. Well, I would say, if you are working on behalf of an organization that has an engaged audience, then especially an organization that's dedicated to conservation, which it sounds like we all are, then I think that you have an obligation to your mission to try to engage people as much as you can. So I think just from a mission standpoint, it's really important. It's not just talking the talk, it's talking the talk to your audience, not internally, but including everyone. So I think that's part of it. I mean, and I'm coming at this a little bit from kind of making the case for promotion and publicity to leadership, which happens for me sometimes. I don't know if it happens to any of you, probably, but just this idea that, hey, if we're going to do this event, if we're going to do this conservation work, let's say, then we really want to include that communications piece so that not only can we let more people know, we can get more people excited about this, we can also increase our reputation, boost our reputation by showing that, like, hey, we don't just say we're a conservation organization, we're doing this work. Here's what it looks like. Here's the way that you can get involved. And if you have an audience that's interested in the topic, which if they're following you online, presumably they are, and you have a call to action that you can share, then it makes sense to try to reach them in a way that allows them to get excited, to get involved. And so I think, I mean, the idea or the question of like, what are some of the ways that digital media can impact conservation action? I mean, I would say a big one is if you have a call to action, let's say it's signing a petition, let's say it's making a small change at home, like turning your thermostat down, or maybe it's attending a cleanup. Obviously, promotion and publicity is going to reach more people. So if you want everybody to show up at a beach cleanup day, if you don't tell them what it is and what you're doing and why and where to go, they're not going to show. So, I mean, that seems obvious, but it's not obvious to everyone. You can't just have the event. You have to find a way to let people know about the event. So I don't know if that's exactly getting at the question, but I think that a lot of times, especially I'm assuming a lot of zoos and aquariums are similar to the Oregon Zoo, a place where we're a little siloed based on kind of who's doing the planning and what the purpose of the event is. So maybe it's the education team working on something, and the people who do the social media, the promotion, the publicity on the comms team don't even know what's happening. We want to get in there early and say, hey, we want to plan to promote this early enough that we can let people know about it and get people excited about it. And then also figure out the right way to do that, which that's, the piece that can go very well or very not, depending on kind of what your plan is and if it ends up working. But I don't know, does that get at the answer to the question? I just think like if it's something that you want people to know about, which most of the time it is, not always. I mean, sometimes if you're talking about, let's say, government advocacy, it might be something that really isn't appropriate to try to bring a bunch of people in on because it's just a lobbyist talking to a legislator. But if it's a bigger story than that, then you want to let people know if they're following your zoo or aquarium online, if they're a member, if they are showing up on grounds. It's important to let them know that you're taking these conservation actions because it shows that you're acting what you say your values are. And presumably those people want to get involved too, and that's why they're there.
Yeah, Kelsey, I think that definitely answers the question. And we went over a little bit of this in the event planning session last weekend. And I think a really important component of planning an event or any kind of campaign really is not forgetting about the social media component and making sure that you are integrating the communication side of things into your plan. Because as you said, like, if you're hosting an event, you want people to know about it, you want people to show up. And I think that again, because the experience of social media is like so inherent to our lives, we're almost like not thinking about it in a way that's like, oh, we actually need to like be really strategic about this. So yeah, I think that totally gets to the root of the question. Let me just check the Q&A. We can get to that one at the end. So yeah, you kind of led us into this question here, putting together that promotional strategy in the first place. What does that actually entail? What does a promotional strategy look like? What are the things that you have to consider when you're putting one together? And then you also mentioned specifically having, calls to action and like a specific messaging, like jumping off point, I guess, a specific area of focus within your campaign or your event, like whatever the issue is that you're focused on. So when you are trying to sit down and figure out, like if you're looking at a calendar, if your event is on the last day of the month, what are you posting on the first day of the month? What does that whole process kind of look like?
Yeah, I think, this seems, again, I think it's going to seem self-explanatory, but you would be surprised, or maybe some of you would not be, how often people are not stopping to ask some of the obvious questions before they get going. But to have a meeting or have a strategy session, even if it's just yourself with a spreadsheet out in front of you and asking, who is the audience? Why are we doing this? What do we want them to do, or what do we want the takeaway to be? Because a lot of times, and I'll say, the zoo that I work for, Oregon Zoo, is run by a government organization. I think this isn't a kind of a reputation that government organizations get, but sometimes it can feel a little bogged down in bureaucracy. And it's this idea of just checking a box like, well, we want to promote this. And you'll say, well, who are we promoting this to? Why are we promoting it? And you'll kind of get crickets because that piece of the strategy has not been developed yet. And so it's really important to start there, I think, because that's going to determine what you do next, right? If you're trying to reach high school students to show up on grounds for a cleanup, that is a very different campaign than if you're trying to reach as many people as possible with a call to action about filling out a web form, for example. Or maybe it's Arctic Sea Ice Day and you're just trying to build awareness. And so it's just how many people can we get to see this? It doesn't matter where they are. And so starting from a place of just like, what are we doing and why? And also being open to the possibility that you might not have an answer, in which case you don't need to move forward on this one. Move your energy to something that is going to produce results for you. And I think, the way that you kind of determine and engage with your target audience is working backwards from there. So let's say that it is like, all right, we have it's World Sea Otter Day at the zoo, and we want to get as many people as possible to show up on grounds. So we're thinking about, who are the people that are most likely to come? In this case, it would be members. Who are the people that are maybe we're less likely to reach, but we want them to come? So then it's like people who live in Portland, but maybe they don't normally come to the zoo. And so what are the channels of communication that we can use to reach those folks? And then it's how do we share this message in a way that's going to be fun, engaging, eye-catching, that's not going to overload people with too much information, because I think in the animal world, that is something that we can really, a trap we can really fall into, myself included, is like, you love sea otters, so you want to tell them everything. But, you know, can you stick with one thing? Let's say it's sea otter reintroduction efforts. And so it's like, hey, the Alaka Alliance is going to be at the Oregon Zoo. We're talking sea otter reintroduction. They haven't been on the Oregon coast in 100 years. It's really important that we learn how to bring them back, you know, and you're using cute sea otters, active video images. You know, we find a lot of people love to see sea otter bang open an oyster and eat it. That's a big, a big engagement piece for us, because it is fun. You don't usually get to see that. And say, hey, here's what's happening. Here's when it's happening. And I think it depends on, I mean, it depends on a lot of things, kind of getting down in the weeds in terms of how far back you might work from something like that. What's your budget? Who are you trying to reach? How are you trying to reach them? But, you know, if it's event marketing, I mean, we'll probably start 6 or 8 weeks out. That's not my area as much. We have a marketing director that plans that stuff a little better, so I don't want to get too in the weeds there. But you want to have all that information on your website and ready to go early. One way that, something that we lean on a lot at the zoo for on ground stuff, is our member newsletter. It goes out to, and it's not just members, it's people who've signed up. So it's like 130,000 people. It goes out every week. We have a pretty high open rate on those. You know, if it's something on grounds that we want people to know about, we'll start there usually. And then if we're trying to reach people around town, maybe it's billboards, maybe it's TV spots. But in terms of social media, I'll say at the Oregon Zoo, our strategy is to use our social media platforms when we are trying to reach as big of an audience as possible. So our social is not so much targeted to individual populations, like let's say around Portland. It's more that we're targeting those messages based on what the platform is. So if we're talking about sea otter reintroduction, which is something that we like to talk about, I would probably have, you know, a longer informative video on YouTube with an interview with a biologist and a caption with a bunch of information and a link to a page on our website that's going to have even more that you can learn. But then I'd edit that down to like a square cropped 45-second video for Facebook, for Twitter, X now. And then I do a vertical version that's even half that length for TikTok and Instagram. You know, maybe it's 20 seconds of kind of the most fun, biggest takeaway piece. But then I'm always providing a link for people who are like, I liked that, I want to learn more, you know. So I think, and I'm seeing this prompt about strategies to maintain consistency in messaging. One thing that we'll do is, again, it's like starting at the little seed and always kind of working back from that. So it's like, who is this for? What are we trying to tell them? And developing a strong, just kind of clear message of 1 sentence or 2 sentence. Sea otters have been gone from Oregon for 100 years. We're working to bring them back. Okay, that's the takeaway. So everywhere that we talk about this, we want to make sure that's being said right away. I see somebody has a hand up. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if that was a
Or maybe it was an accidental hand up.
way.
Oh, but I also see a question of which editing platforms to use for editing videos. We use Final Cut Pro, and that's because we're all on Macs at the zoo. And so that's an easier platform for us to use. I have worked in Premiere. I find Final Cut Pro a little bit easier, but I think that's just because that's what I'm kind of used to right now. And in terms of the type of content that we try to film, obviously cuteness reigns when it comes to animal content. But more specifically, we love to try to get exciting behavior that you wouldn't normally get to see. So I think that the sea otter opening the oyster is a great example of that. Another thing that is, we have a lot of fun showing people is like, we have dwarf mongooses at the zoo, and they'll launch plastic eggs behind their, like through their hind legs to crack them open and get treats inside. That's a natural behavior that mongooses perform in the wild, but you don't normally get to see something like that. You know, we'll put out enrichment for lions that they like to roll in, scent enrichment that they like to roll in and groom. And it's like, you know, it's exciting to get a close-up look at something that you normally wouldn't get to see. And then we try to film things as close as we can. We use a lot of GoPros. We use a lot of low angle video to try to really make people feel like they are right there. If we can't get a good angle on something, if the video doesn't look good, we won't share it. Even if it's something that's cool to see in person, the video doesn't look good, we don't use it.
Yeah, Kelsey, that's a really, I think, thank you for covering all of this too, because there are a lot of different approaches to doing different kinds of social media and communication strategy. And like all of the stuff that you've been talking about in terms of like what is an organization or a facility like a zoo going to use their social media for? Of course, you want to show the animals. And I think that that like idea really translates to, a young person who is, maybe you guys would be starting your own like Instagram account specifically for sharing educational resources or whatever it is. And one of the things I think there may be a question about this in the future of the discussion. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think that um, having that a good mix of the engagement driving content like you're talking about with like the really cute animal videos that so many people are going to share because they love them, and then also like sprinkling in your little calls to action and your educational posts and your don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, like the little promotional things in there too. Having that mix is really, really important. And that's also, I think, why it's so important to put together a strategy beforehand. Like you said, have your end goal, build backwards. That's also something that, again, we talked about in the event session last week, and it totally also translates to social. So, yeah, and you also covered, different platforms work better for different things. I also want to mention LinkedIn too, because that's
Yeah.
not necessarily something that like younger people who aren't necessarily in the workforce right now may be involved in. But LinkedIn is actually very good for sharing events, I think. Do you have any like comments on that? Because LinkedIn is not my forte, but I know that it's like a very good resource for people to use.
Yeah, I know that it is too. And I will be honest that I wish we had a stronger presence on LinkedIn at the zoo. It's a little bit of a, I don't want to say an afterthought, but I go in, I have actually a calendar reminder so that I don't forget about LinkedIn. And
Fair, that's fair.
when we put out a news story like, oh, the first condor egg was laid of our, 2024 breeding season, then, I'll look for media pickup and I'll share that stuff on LinkedIn and tag those out. My main strategy right now is just those third party endorsements, like sharing news that we have at the zoo. Uh, but I know there are people who are doing a lot more with it and would love to get some more exciting strategies on there, because I think right now we're kind of maintaining the status quo. Like, it's an active account. You can find us on there. I want to make sure everything's up to date and looking good, and that you can learn new stuff that's happening at the zoo on our LinkedIn page, but we're not really pushing the envelope. I
Mm.
have to say, I know some places are doing it better. If anyone
Yeah,
here,
LinkedIn is it's a tricky one. I feel like once you figure it out, you're in the clear, but getting to that point is like there's a lot of weirdness. I don't know. LinkedIn, again, not my forte.
no, but it's a good one, I think. If
Yeah.
it is.
So yeah, so in all of the things that we're talking about, messaging is probably one of the most important because you can have that really high quality content like you're talking about with GoPro and like really nicely edited and all the lighting looks good, the audio sounds good. But if it's just sort of presented without any context or any sort of narrative, like it can drive engagement, sure, but it's not necessarily compelling somebody to, follow you for action purposes or engage with your other more action or just general advocacy oriented campaigns. So when we talk about messaging on social media and just in communications in general, how you frame things is very important. And I use the word storyteller here because I think that it kind of is what you're doing when you're, using communications. You are telling the story of that cute little sea otter or, the work that this one advocacy group is doing or this event that you're holding. You are telling that story. So, when, you might not be a good or like the best writer of all time, and you might not have a ton of experience in like storytelling per se, but I don't think that that should dissuade anyone from trying to, you know, engage with an audience. So what are some of the things that really make a storyteller effective, I think is kind of what I want to get at the first question. And then we can kind of dive into these other two questions kind of separately, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it really is connected to what we were just talking about on the last slide, which is kind of knowing what you want to say and starting from there. So, in and trying not to get too bogged down, what's the takeaway that you want to happen at the end? A lot of times when I'm starting out writing like a video script, I'll bullet for myself just who is this for? What's the point? And then how am I going to get them to that point? And so knowing what that crux is first, I'll use an example. Right now, I'm working on a video with the US Geological Survey about a polar bear land use study that they have coming out that shows how polar bears are using land in the summer now that Arctic sea ice is melting, where they're going, what they're doing. And so, I worked on a script that I thought was very straightforward for that, but also you want to have a bit of a reason to engage people and get them excited. So you don't want to just come out and say, here's what the study found. You want to come out and say, hey, first, here's polar bears looking cute and catching your eye. Then these polar bears are in trouble. Then here's what these researchers tried to figure out, and here's what they found. And I was working with a team, or have been working with a team of biologists that kept trying to get more information into the script because that's where they're coming from. They're the ones who designed the study. That's not my area. Like, they're the experts. They designed the study. Of course, they want to fit all this stuff in there. But I kept coming back and saying, we want to keep this very clear. There is a place to share that information, and it's in the news release, on the website. We are including a link right in the video about where you can go to get all of this information. But for this video, it's just what's going on with these polar bears? What does this tell us? And then how can I learn more? And we want to keep it short, engaging, very clear. I said, imagine a teacher in a classroom of, let's say, sixth graders showing the video. We want them to be able to, we want them to care, and we want them to be able to take away the point without getting sort of bogged down with like, how many weeks did the study last for? And how many pounds of weight did the bears lose? And what foods do we think they were eating versus what foods would they have eaten if they were on the ice? I was like, that's all really cool information, but that's we're losing the thread because we're trying to get too much stuff going on in here. So I think that's a common mistake, is that especially if you're passionate about something, you're excited about it, or you're really knowledgeable about it, then you want to get all of that stuff in there. It's like, I don't know, decorating a cake with too many decorations or something. It's like, if it's a good cake, it doesn't need all of that. It just needs the frosting and one candle. So I would say maybe even it can help to write down everything and then start taking stuff away. Sometimes I like to write a script and then try to edit it down to get it as short as I can. And then I think, this idea, I'm looking at the prompt of how authenticity and transparency can enhance. I think the message should make sense for kind of what either your organization or your brand is. Like, you wouldn't go to, let's say, Audubon Society for ocean conservation, even though it's an animal organization and you trust them. That's not where you're going to go for that information. So it should make sense for what your brand is. And then that authenticity is going to shine through. People are going to say, hey, the Brookfield Zoo does, I'm making this up, but they do lion conservation, and I see that impact. And I saw this story and it had an impact, and I'm following this organization because I know this is a place I can go for this information. And including those calls to action when they exist is a really important piece of that too, because if you're an engaged person and you're looking at this content, then what's the next step? And even if it's something like, go here to learn more, subscribe to our newsletter, follow along, or maybe it's a partner organization. A lot of times we're working with, Alaka Alliance or USGS or whatever it is, and saying, hey, follow them to learn more too, boosting each other's content. And, then continuing to tell those stories. I think something that is easy for me to forget, and I think anybody who's creating content, but it's like, we think that because we're sharing all this stuff that our audience is seeing everything that we put out all the time. But it's humbling to remember that they really aren't. Even if we have 2.3 million followers on TikTok, And a lot of times I'll post something and it'll get like 20,000 views. I mean, it's just like not all 2 million people who follow us are seeing this content. And so it's okay to share another polar bear video, even though to me, I'm like, well, we just shared a polar bear video 2 weeks ago. Most of these people didn't see it. You can go again with the polar bear video if you have something to say. So I think that's something too. It can feel like, gosh, we're always talking about this. Well, maybe internally we're always talking about this, but your audience is probably hearing from dozens of organizations talking about this stuff. It's not redundant to them. They probably didn't even see what you said last time. They have a life outside of what your work is. So it's okay to say it again.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelsey. I want to emphasize, I wrote myself a little note here for some of the stuff you said at the beginning, because um the pop goals is a technique that I personally use a lot with organizing something like this advocacy training. Pop stands for purpose, outcome, process. You said you would write down, like, who is this video for? What is the purpose of the video that I'm making? What is the outcome that I want to get? What is the thing that I want people to learn from this post? Is it a call to action? Is it just to drive engagement? Is it to get people to engage with another form of communications or on a different platform? And then what does the process for that look like? And then you were also kind of talking about, just generally knowing your audience. And that's very important for a storyteller. And also, I think something that is a common pitfall for people, like you were saying. Science communication is very difficult. It is very, very, very difficult. And I think sometimes people take that for granted because, like you were saying, you were working with some biologists to put together this video and they wanted to include a ton of like really heavy information in there. And like you said, that would be great if you were going to like a conference, like a biology or like conservation conference, where there's a bunch of people who are actively wanting to hear all of these like really minute details. But if that's not your audience, then that kind of content might not work. But the other thing that we want to be thinking about, like you've mentioned a lot, is it's not just social media, it's also other forms of communications too. And so that's kind of why this session is both, because you said having the video with all of that stuff is not maybe great for that specific outlet, but you can put all of that information somewhere else. And then I also wrote another note, and then we can move on to the next question. If anybody here has ever heard of the concept of ethos, pathos, and logos, those are, I believe, Greek or Latin terms.
Yeah.
I always kind of keep that in the back of my head. And essentially, ethos is what is the emotional connection? Some people are more compelled to engage with content if the algorithm allows them to engage with the content. They're more likely to engage with something that's compelling them emotionally. Some people are more logic minded, and some people are more just give it to me straight. Like, what is the problem? How do we fix it? And if you go, and I can type it in the chat so you know how to spell everything, but I highly recommend that you go and dig into that concept, because I've found that very helpful for me personally. And Kelsey, you nodded when I said that, so I'm assuming you've also kind of utilized that in your work as well.
Yeah, and that was a bit. I went to Gonzaga University, which is a Jesuit school, and that was a big triangle of our learning. So, and it is really helpful because it's easy to sort of get locked into what works for you as a consumer of information and communicator. And I'm like, well, what people want is something to be funny or whatever it might, whatever your particular approach might be. And it's good to remember exactly that some people want that emotional appeal, some people want that logical appeal, some people are looking for kind of a blend. And so if you are looking at it, what you're saying from multiple angles, or even better yet, providing a couple of different approaches about the same thing, because that goes back to this idea that like it's not overkill to tell a story a couple of different times and say the same thing. I
Absolutely.
always tell my coworker, my videographer, will say, kind of that he feels like we're doing stuff, coming back to the same animals too much or talking about the same stuff too often, which I get it because I feel like that too. That's where we work. And I'm like, there are TikTok accounts that have millions of followers that are literally just one dog, like not even one breed of dog. It's like
The
just
same dog.
it's just this one pug. And it is a video of the same dog every single day. And people are not sick of him. So, I don't think that I don't think that we're doing too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that too. Um, I don't remember this statistic exactly off the top of my head, but it was just a rule of thumb that somebody shared with me recently that was like, in order to get people to see your content and engage with your content, you have to post the same thing 7 times. 7 times. Just because the algorithm is just
Yeah,
like
people don't see it.
crazy. And yeah, it's unfortunate that that's kind of the way things are now. It didn't used to be like that, and the algorithm is constantly evolving. But 7 times is apparently like the golden ratio for getting people to engage with your content, which I don't know if that's like a real thing, but it seems to be that that's the case, I
It
guess.
definitely feels like stuff that we go to a lot. There will be people who are like, I've never seen this before. When you're just like, don't you follow us? Haven't you seen polar bears diving into the pool before? This is kind of a mainstay on our page. And it's like, nope, they haven't seen it. The algorithm keeps people from seeing most of the stuff you post.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but again, that's why authenticity and transparency is so important,
Right.
because if you're engaging with your audience and they know at whatever point, if you're posting something, that they know that you're doing it for a reason, at least, even if the algorithm is not cooperating, let's say. So, yeah, we did get a question earlier about talking about video editing specifically, but are there any other specific tools like automated schedulers and stuff like that that help in your work? And then are there anything like, what is the word? I don't know exactly what they're called. On Instagram stories where they have like the stickers and the links and the quiz boxes and all of that stuff. Like, are there any other kind of social media extras that are overused or underused? And then if you have any other like particular accounts or groups, either within the zoo and aquarium world or outside of it, more on the advocacy side of things, where you go to for digital media inspiration. I think sharing some examples might, spur some ideas from people.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Oregon Zoo is a little bit of an outlier in some of this, and I will give credit for that to my colleague Shervin Hess, who has moved to a different department at the zoo, but really kind of started some of our best practices. In that we really stick with the organic in-app tools when it comes to measuring our analytics, kind of making decisions about what we're going to do. And we do use a data-based approach when we can, of kind of like, okay, let's look at the analytics from the last month. What worked? What is catching people's eye? What isn't working? One example that surprised me when I started at the zoo is that, at least based on our analytics, people don't like to see primates on social media. We do not get a good engagement rate on really any primate content, which is too bad because we have an awesome primate team at the zoo. We have amazing primates, and it's really cool to see those animals in person. It's just, for whatever reason, I mean, I have my theories, but for whatever reason, people don't really like to engage with primates online.
That's so
So,
interesting. I've never
yeah,
heard that before. That's crazy.
and it's not that we'll never show primates. Of course we still do. It's just knowing, I mean, you talked a little bit before about like balancing that, the calls to action with the cute content, and it's also like balancing the high engagement stuff with the engagement that is going to come in a little bit lower. So it's like, well, we have primates at the zoo. We don't want to keep them hidden, but it's not going to be like a weekly go-to for us to show chimpanzee enrichment or, you know, gibbons or whatever it might be. We'll hold off and do that a little more sparingly. We usually just post, in fact, for our social media content, we only do organic reach. We don't pay to promote anything. However, I do know that a lot of zoos and aquariums who I think are doing great work do that. So I don't think it's a bad practice. It's just not the way we've built our program. We do pay for event marketing on social media. And so we'll target event ads, but when it's like our platform content, calls to action for conservation, or just our regular kind of cute zoo stuff, we just use organic for that. Um, I think this is just my opinion. A lot of zoos and aquariums kind of do things differently, and that's there's nothing good or bad about it. I don't feel like it's really the right role for a aquarium or zoo to try to like get in front of trends on social media or do a lot of kind of trending content. I find it a little bit, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a better way to put it than just it seems like it's sort of trying a little bit too hard. It's not authentic to be, I don't know. Like, for example, like when it was a big deal on TikTok to do like choreographed dancing. I don't think that's as much now, but getting all the zookeepers to like do this dance. I'm like, that's not why people are following us. I don't think it really makes sense. I don't think it's bad. I just, to me, it's just kind of like, why? That doesn't really make sense for what we're about. We tend to think that if we keep things cute and pretty straightforward, that that's a better lane for us to be in than trying to get a little too clever with it, or like, and again, I will not throw anyone under the bus. It works for some people, but there's that trend on TikTok right now that it's like, we're blank, we do this, and I saw one, it's like, we're zookeepers, we shovel in a habitat or something. That's just like, okay, I just feel like people are here for animals. If I can't put an animal on screen for this trend, I probably am not going to try to get in there. But that might not be a super popular opinion. I think I might err a little bit too much on the side of sort of not engaging in some of that stuff. I do think, however, and this is getting a little bit in the weeds with it, but when an app is promoting a new feature, for example, Instagram right now is promoting like a poll feature where you write your regular caption and then you can add a poll at the bottom. So it's like, we just launched a web series about beavers, for example, and Instagram prompted me to include a poll with the caption. So in the first episode, I did the caption and then I put a poll, will you tune in next week? And I mean, I did a little beaver pun with it, but it was basically, are you going to watch next time? And we have found that if there is a new feature, then the algorithm is more likely to give you a boost if you use it. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
they're really trying to get people to use this poll. Okay, we'll use the poll. Once the promotion kind of dies down, then it's like, okay, did it work or not? I mean, I think sometimes a poll makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. But when something's new like that, I think it's worth trying it. And, in general, I mean, I have seen a lot of trends kind of, you mentioned Instagram stories. It feels like when Instagram stories was a little bit newer, everybody was going for all of the little like tools that you could do, myself included. It's like, oh, let's do all these quizzes and kind of fun games. And we would do like guess the animal group noun and have these quizzes. And it was fun, but it just feels like we've kind of moved away from that and it's much more straightforward. Like we use Instagram stories a lot of times to tell a 3 or 4 part story, with pictures, because the way most people use it is like tap, tap, tap. They're kind of moving from A, B, C to D. So I try not to do too many bells and whistles and keep it pretty straightforward. However, our TikTok rep said that the more that you, and again, I mean, nobody knows how to really game these systems, right? But that the more you kind of manipulate your video within the app, the more the algorithm will like see it. So putting stickers on, or we don't use any filters or use any sort of Photoshop or anything for our video. But doing that, if it's something that you can do, I think is another thing that the algorithm will kind of notice. I don't know. I mean, I don't always believe what our TikTok rep has said because our TikTok success has gone up and down sort of regardless of following any of those tips. I will say in terms of other counts that I like to look at, and these are people who I know too, but I think Monterey Bay Aquarium is always a standout when it comes to ocean conservation, and they do a lot of
Agreed.
different, yeah, they do a lot of
Absolutely agreed.
different types of content too. So you can find like really long stuff, really short stuff. They're out there on Twitch in a way that a lot of zoos and aquariums are not. They have um like a private group for activists that they can join that they monitor. They have YouTube series, they do long form stuff, short stuff, and I have a friend who works there, but so I'm a little biased, but I think they do awesome stuff. And then San Diego Zoo is another one
Mhm.
that has a lot of different types of content. I mean, I joke we're jealous of them because they have so many animals that live at the zoo, especially so many baby animals, that it's like, oh, so hard to get people to pay attention when you have 5 baby capybaras in a pool. But they do a great job with it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And we will get to the Q&A stuff in a second here, but I also just want to mention, as far as like specific resources, Canva is free for nonprofits. So if you are working with an organization that has the 501c3 nonprofit status, you can apply for Canva and use that tool for free, which is amazing. I think they also just developed a video editing software. To go back to the question that we were asked earlier, this presentation that you are currently looking at was made on Canva. And it's just a really, I use it almost every day. Very, very helpful. And then
I love Canva. Yeah.
there's other tools that you can use to like get your content out there, so you can schedule it beforehand and kind of forget about it and focus on other things at the, like, as the stuff is being posted for you. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was trial and error is a really big part of social media and just communications in general. And I think, like, to your point, Kelsey, like, sometimes you'll get a tip on something and you'll try it out and it just won't work. And there's not really any way of like telling why it won't work, but you just have to kind of constantly be adjusting and thinking creatively and outside the box and trying to get it to work with your audience. And then the other thing is too, you know, a lot of what you're talking about, Kelsey, is specific to a really large facility. And talking about, going viral, I think there's actually, I'm going to skip to the next slide because, yeah, this actually is a question right here.
Oh,
Talking about what the next big thing is. We kind of already talked about this actually, but going viral could be the goal if you're somebody who has like a very large following, or you are actively in a growth phase where your main goal is to just grow the number of eyes who are getting your content. But I also want to remind everybody watching this that as a young person who is, utilizing different forms of communication and social media for a more localized, specific event or campaign, I don't think that, we very much as young people can get caught up in the numbers of things, and we don't want to have whether your content is going viral or not be like a good indicator of if your campaign is successful, because you can have a really viral piece of content and not have anybody like contributing to your campaign or participating in your event. So if your event or campaign is really local and you're only really need to reach like a couple people around you in your community, that's okay too. Like, that is completely fine. And I don't want anybody to think that, like, just because we're not seeing like this outrageously high engagement on social media, that our campaign is ineffective, because those correlation does not equal causation. You know what I mean? So we can kind of, I think, skip the viral question because we kind of already talked about it. And so, yeah, we've also talked about this a lot, but more specifically, the fluff content, right? This is a term that the World Ocean Day manager, Kate, uses when she helps us with these social media sessions sometimes. And the fluff content is more of the engagement driving stuff. How are you utilizing the algorithm versus the educational calls to action, more the oriented stuff towards like getting people to move to a different website or to a different platform or whatever. So how, Kelsey, when you're posting all of these like super cute animal videos, I wouldn't say for a zoo that equates to fluff content, because that is exactly what a zoo does. That's like kind of the whole thing. But if you are, running a event or a campaign, you can still utilize that kind of content. So what is the like ratio, do you think, where you're actively posting the stuff that you want to drive people towards versus the stuff that you're posting specifically to get more eyes on your content? Where is that like line for you?
Yeah, I mean, coming back to what you said about trial and error, I think that's really key. And it's hard, especially when you're starting out, to internalize this idea that messing up is part of it and that trying stuff that doesn't work is still part of being successful at your job, because nobody likes to post something and have it just flop, you know? And it also doesn't mean that the content is bad. That is something that is really frustrating with the algorithm. Something that did really well one day could do poorly another day, and you're just like ready to kick your phone into the ocean because there's just no rhyme or reason to it.
And that
But
honestly relates to the last question on here
yeah.
too. There's some strategies for young people to employ when dealing with negativity online. Like it's
Yeah.
exactly that. Yeah.
Totally. And it's hard not to get your ego kind of wrapped up in it and have those numbers like kind of start to mean too much. I've certainly been there. And in terms of that kind of ratio, we call it the chocolate covered vitamin approach at the zoo. This idea that, we're kind of sneaking in the vitamin content with all the candy. I would say it really depends on kind of what's going on and what we have to share. But in general, maybe 10 to 20% of the content is the sort of more serious calls to action. I try to get something once a week, at least on one of our platforms, that is talking about our conservation species recovery work, or directing people to an organization that we partner with to do habitat restoration, or you know whatever that the kind of more serious content may be. And then, like you said, I mean, that kind of fluffy content can still be mission driven depending on what it is. It's just a different piece. Like, I mean, I use those dwarf mongooses as an example. It's like that's something that's really fun and engaging and can get a lot of eyeballs, but it's also an opportunity to tell people about a natural behavior, and to show without telling that, hey, animals at the Oregon Zoo get top-notch care and they have an opportunity to engage in these natural behaviors daily because they have such awesome keepers. And so that's something that I would still consider kind of, mission driven comms, but in a much different way than, say, like, hey, it's Arctic Sea Ice Day and here are ways that you can take action for polar bears. So I think there's trial and error in finding that balance, but I would say we're in the kind of like 15%, 20% serious realm. Of course, it depends on what platform you're on too. I'd say our YouTube channel is more serious than our TikTok channel.
Yeah.
Um, and then with strategies to employ when dealing with negativity online, it's hard. I think it takes some practice. It does not feel good to have people speak negatively about your organization. I would say ignore it as much as humanly possible. If your organization is supportive of you even turning off comments or turning off messages, we turned off our messages on our Facebook page just because they were just a dumpster fire. There was like nothing productive happening there. Better to not give people the channel, period. If they need to get in touch with us, they can email us. We don't need these kind of knee-jerk bad messages. And then, I mean, my rule is if somebody is asking a good faith question, even if it's about something that I'd rather not talk about, I'll answer it. Even if they're like, I heard that your elephants don't have enough outdoor access. Can you tell me about that, or whatever it is? I think if this person seems like they really want to know, I'll follow up. If someone is just making a negative comment to say something, I ignore it, and I just try to move on and pretend like I didn't see it. I also think that we feel this pressure to feed the beast constantly, and just like, well, if you're going to be successful online, you've got to post 4 or 5 pieces of content a week, and you've got to do it across all these platforms. And it's not necessarily true. It's nice when you can keep up a consistent posting schedule, but if you need a break, you need a break. Your mental health is more important. It's really not worth trying to chase some of these trends if it's making you miserable. And so if things are starting to feel too negative, step back from it, turn it off.
Mhm.
My advice. Easier said than done, but I also think that one thing that is a positive about the type of work that we all do with animals is that, as much as I can sometimes feel this sort of dystopianness of social media, I gotta help her. Uh, it also feels good to be sharing information that I do feel strongly positively about, and feel like I'm contributing to good instead of evil, you know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I do want people to take action for these animals and these habitats. Hey, honey, I'm in the meeting. Can you talk? What are you talking about? You can listen, but no speaking to me, please. It's a Saturday. We're all home.
It's all good. It's good to see you, bud. I hope you're having a good Saturday. Yeah, I think we have a few minutes. We've got like 5 minutes for Q&A, and I do want to address a couple of these. I think we've kind of talked about a lot of them actually. Uh, in terms of this first one, talking about like needing to post 7 times for people to see it, that uh basically depends on what the thing is that you're trying to get people to see. If you just want people to see a fluff post where it's a really funny meme or something like that, that can be over whatever amount of time, versus like if it's a time sensitive campaign, call to action, petition, signature, whatever it is, that's going to be more on like a shorter timeline, maybe weekly, monthly, whatever. I also want to address this question: is there an ideal amount of money to invest in social media marketing and paid ads? That question is there's going to be a different answer for whatever the work is that you are doing and whatever the organization is that you're working with. A zoo or aquarium or museum, if you are working directly with them, clearly has more of a budget than a young person who is doing grassroots organizing and advocacy from the ground up. So for somebody who is not working directly with an organization, I would say $5. Like, if you have a budget for it, great. I don't think it needs to be anything crazy. And if you don't have a budget for it, then that's also completely fine. You can reach out to other members of your network and ask them to share the work that you're doing, and you can have growth happen that way without having to spend money on it. And then let me see here. Jory asked a question: when making videos, does making videos that follow things like TikTok trends make it more likely for people to see it, interact, and enjoy it? Kelsey, you kind of already answered this question, like you said manipulating the video within the app. Does that just like play with the algorithm a little bit?
That is what I was told. I mean, just this idea that basically the more kind of sticky you've made your video, the more the algorithm might pay attention to it. I would say what I try to look at more is kind of what's working on these platforms and how long are the videos and what type of messaging is it, and not so much like I'm going to try to do this trend. Although certainly people can have success with using, let's say, like a trending track like music. But to me, it's more like, okay, I have found that a shorter video, like 10 to 20 seconds, gets more play on TikTok than a 60 to 90-second video does. So I'm going to try to say my message in a way that's shorter. To me, that has paid off more than trying to follow specific trends, more looking at the format of the platform itself and what are people responding to. But I do see different ways that people find success. So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying a trend, especially to me, it all comes down to like, does this make sense for what you're trying to say? If there happened to be a trend that was like, hey, what's going wild on TikTok right now is chimpanzees opening up a coconut. We're doing that. We have chimpanzees that can open up a coconut at the zoo. It's unlikely that that would start trending, but if it did, we would do that trend because it makes sense for us. But if what's trending is people lip syncing to like an Ice Spice song or something, we're not going to do that because that doesn't make sense
It
for.
doesn't make sense for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally. That absolutely makes sense. Um, So thanks, Jory, for asking that question. And then we have like literally 1 minute left. So I just want to address Savannah's question really quick. What's a good way for somebody without access to the inside of a ZAM, zoo, aquarium, or museum to get good content to make animal message video? Are we allowed to use footage from zoo websites? Should we visit the zoo? Is there another way? Quickly, I do want to say that there are, I don't know, I think it's open source, possibly the term for it, but there are websites that you can go to that have like B-roll footage of things that you can just use for whatever reason. It's not copyrighted, it's like licensed specifically for those purposes. Canva actually offers a lot of that in the software like on their website. So that's also helpful. But as far as like zoo and aquarium specifically, I think that if you are a young person who is, in a volunteer program or doing any direct programming with the zoo, you are more likely to be able to at least ask somebody. But as far as like getting in and using those videos, or like having access, is there anything specific on that front, Kelsey, that you think would be helpful here?
Well, first of all, I'd really recommend doing a search. I don't know if people know how to do a Creative Commons content search, but you can just do it in Google. You can do a Google image search and you can use the filters and say that you're looking for something that is available with a Creative Commons license, which means anybody can use it. So you can get a lot of, you can also search that way on Flickr. And you can search for video content there. Also, government agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, US Fish and Wildlife, USGS, like there are a lot of organizations that because it's a government organization, their stuff is public domain and anyone can use it. So there is a ton of like great ocean stuff out there, animals that are in these habitats that you can find, download the video, and you are welcome to use it just with credit at the end of the video. So you just say where you got the footage. And a lot of times a zoo or aquarium would be willing to do the same thing. I mean, if someone asked me like, hey, I want to do this advocacy, I would say if you credit the Oregon Zoo, you're welcome to use that. Also just reposting, sharing stuff from, zoos and aquariums. I mentioned like San Diego Zoo has so many cute baby animals. It's social media. Anybody can share that content. You can repost and say, hey, aren't these capybaras cute? And here's what I have to say. I mean, piggyback on their audience, share that stuff. That's what it's there for. So I think as long as you're giving credit or asking permission, there's a lot of footage out there. And also, we encourage people to come to the zoo and take their own stuff too. It's just like when you don't work there, you can't dedicate the time to waiting for the tigers to come out. So you can always email a comms person at the zoo and ask them. They'll probably say yes.
That's a good point too. Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, credit is definitely the biggest part of that. And that goes for anything on the internet, including something as silly as a meme or like art, especially art. Always credit artists, always, 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 always credit artists. Cannot stress that enough. We are a couple minutes over. So really quickly, I just want to give you guys the schedule for next Saturday, same place, same time, last session of advocacy training, campaign organizing. I'm really excited for that session. We're going to dig into kind of take all of the things that we've learned in the last 3 weeks and put them together and talk about what it means to have an effective campaign. And then again, just talking about our 2024 World Ocean Day action theme, catalyzing action for the ocean and climate. We are doing 12 months of action. January, we are sharing resources on ocean and climate literacy. And then next month for February, our monthly focus is environmental justice. So we will be putting out some action guides, hopefully doing another webinar, and a lot of really fun stuff coming down the pipeline. So be sure to stay tuned. I hope to see you guys next Saturday. And then last but not least, a giant, huge thank you to Kelsey for sharing our Saturdays, sharing your Saturday with us, and just really providing super insightful responses to these questions. And I think that based on the chat and the Q&A that I think you guys got a lot out of it. I know I always learn when I get to sit down with really cool people and have these conversations. So thank you so much, Kelsey. We really,
Thanks,
really,
everybody. It was really fun.
yeah, thank you guys so much.
And anyone here, feel free to email me if you have follow-up questions. I would be happy to answer them. So
Awesome, cool. And I can share your email, Kelsey,
great.
in our reminder email, follow-up email from this Zoom call. And then if you guys have any questions as well, feel free to email me as well. But we will see you next Saturday. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everybody.